This episode is brought to you by iCave Dave merch. What Apple didn't tell you was coming, including the MacBook Air 15 inches. Apple has always been a secretive company, and in recent years they've been getting even better at keeping their plans under their hats. But sometimes their silence has actually told us a lot, and other times Ross Displayman has just found out what screens Apple's going to buy, and that could be pretty helpful too. Help me achieve my goal of 1 million subscribers. I know we're only on 11,000, but I'm allowed to be as ambitious as Max Tech are. More on the new MacBook Air, both the announced 13.6 inch and the secret 15 point something inch versions coming later, but at WWDC there's some stuff that was hinted at but not revealed. For example, the always-on lock screen for the next iPhone, at least the Pros, and things like that. I mean, that would work perfectly with the widgets, and there are code snippets that have actually allowed some developers to get this working on an iPhone X, and actually some bugs where it randomly happened to people with iPhone Xs without actually trying, if inconsistently. Now, there were also no updates for Apple TVOS mentioned at WWDC, but we've heard rumours already of a smaller or at least lower cost version of the Apple TV coming soon. Could a new version finally bring cameras to the living room for FaceTime calls? Will it maybe even just be something that sits on top of your TV and include a top clip so that you can use continuity camera to make your iPhone your camera for the TV for making calls from there? Maybe. And it's not like Apple hasn't done anything with Apple TV. There are updates. There is a beta program for it, exactly the same as there is for the HomePods and actually AirPods. And Editor Dave here because I completely forgot to actually mention the stuff about the AirPods beta. So what is actually going on with this is that the AirPods Max has got in the beta support support for the LC3 Bluetooth codec, which is basically a more efficient, lower latency version, and can give you better audio through it. So this might actually be on the way to getting lossless support on AirPods. This might also come then to the AirPods Pro, which we're expecting to get a refit this year with an updated version of the H1 chip inside, which I'm going to go out on a limb and call it H2. So yeah, this might be on the way back to the main show. Thanks. But on HomePods, first of all, there was no mention of those either at WWDC, but again, there's rumours of a larger version coming. And it'll be interesting to see why they didn't mention it at WWDC. Is it because all of the new features are basically tied to the new hardware? Are we talking about the same size as the old one? Is it going to be something in between the mini and the larger one? Who knows? But on HomeKit itself, apparently you won't be able to use an iPad as a home hub anymore, which is basically the device that stays in your home and connected to your Wi-Fi and basically interfaces between your smart home devices and your network connection, which is a bit of a bummer as it's a great way to use an older iPad, especially if the battery has started going a bit crap and you keep it in your kitchen as a mini TV to watch YouTube and control the audio within that room, especially as the cheapest iPads still have audio jacks on them, at least for this year. But you will still be able to use an Apple TV or a HomePod mini at least, and probably those new versions of the hardware too, unless Apple's going to bring something even more differenter coming. Who knows? But onto the main event though, the MacBook Air 15 inch, what are we expecting? Well, Ross Displayman Young, the display analyst extraordinaire, has revealed that Apple is not only looking at 14.1 inch iPads and not iPad Pros, just iPads. They aren't going to have mini LED and they're not going to have ProMotion. They're going to be just a massive iPad. But they're also looking at a 15 inch panel for a future MacBook Air, or MacBook not Pro at least, slated for a release in the spring of 2023 by most sources, and Guoming Chi has mentioned that it could feature the M2 and M2 Pro chips inside. Now, Apple Silicon hasn't shown willing to discriminate power by dimensions so far, with the 14-inch and 16-inch MacBook Pros both getting exactly the same chips, exactly the same combinations, except that you can get the binned one in the 14-inch to make it cheaper. That's the only difference. But you can still go all the way up in the 14-inch and 16-inch to the full-bore M1 Max chips. So that would suggest that the regular 13.6-inch MacBook Air could also see an M2 Pro in it, if that's the case. But this is where it starts to get a little bit sussy, because we're already hearing that the MacBook Pro with M2 is running significantly hotter than the M1. More on that later. And that has a fan inside. So would this 15-inch MacBook really be an Air, and is the Air moniker now defined by the lack of a fan? Surely the M2 Pro would be hotter than the M2, so could this just be a MacBook that's going to be the 15-inch model with a fan inside? Maybe. There are a lot of questions still to be answered if this 15-inch thing with a non-pro display but a notch and a new design are to actually emerge. But if it's fanless, I guess it will be limited to the base M2. If not, maybe it won't be an Air. We also heard about a 12-inch MacBook being looked into, but there's no sign of that in the supply chain yet. So if Mark Gurman is right on this one, that info has to have come from someone inside Apple and most likely inside the design studio. But I wouldn't hold your breath because that is not going to be here anytime soon. At least 2 years out, I would guess. Now, we're going to be into your questions next, but first, a quick word from our handsome sponsor, me. Many of you have asked about tea as a possible use for our coffee cups. Now, perhaps there could be a special edition cup designed with tea compatibility in mind, and we've taken all of your comments into account, and the answer is absolutely not. These are for coffee, the raw material from which iCaveDave's channel is made. Thank you for your feedback. iCaveDave.com/merch. Now, back to our regular programming. Mark Graff asks, iCave answers, Dave the Magnificent, appreciated. What size TV do you use as your monitor? In Goldilocks terms, is it too big, too small, or just right for you? What advice would you give to someone looking to buy a TV as a monitor? This is my beautiful TV over here. This is a 40-inch 4K panel. This is a JCV one. And I'll be honest, it's been amazing. There's been literally nothing I've disliked about it. And it's so much cheaper than buying a proper computer monitor. Now, is it perfect for color grading? No. Is it perfect for, high refresh rate stuff? No, this runs at 60 Hz, and that's fine for me. Do you need more than 60 Hz? You're not going to get ProMotion on a TV, more than likely, unless you're paying several thousand. Yeah, it's absolutely perfect for what I do. So it runs at 4K because it's big enough. It runs at 4K natively, so I get basically 4 1080p screens worth of display real estate. It is basically the same as having 2 ultra-wides stacked on top of each other. This is why I don't understand the ultra-wide argument. People are like, it's so much more productive. It's not, because this is twice as productive. There's 2 times as much productive here as in an ultra-wide. Because it is ultra-wide, it's just got 2 of them stacked up, and I can just watch a movie on it. It's great. That's what I would look for in a monitor. If you do need to do full-on color grading, if you need to do very professional work, fine. Don't do it. If your professional work involves color grading, video editing, if you're an amateur like me, it's absolutely fine, because the vast majority of people are not watching your YouTube videos on a reference monitor. And the worst case scenario is I look a little bit of a funny color, and that's not going to affect the news. Lars Anderson asks, iCave answers, the M1 MacBook Pro SSD is up to twice as fast as the SSD in the M2 MacBook Pro. Will the M2 MacBook Air face the same performance hit? So this is a really interesting question, and this is basically, this has been sort of revealed by Max Tech in their testing, and the reason is, if you buy the base model, the 256 gigabytes of storage, which most people will, let's be honest, you're only getting a single memory chip in there, a single storage chip, a single flash memory chip, if you will. And in the M1 MacBook Pros, that was split into 2 128 gigabyte chips. This is a single 256 gigabyte chip, which basically means that it can't do parallel writing to both chips because it's only got one chip in there. So that's where the performance hit is coming from. Does it make a massive difference? Will it make a real world difference for what the vast majority of people are using an M2 device for? I don't think so. It might be noticeable if you are doing 4K or 8K video editing, but if you are doing that off of the internal drive, you're also going to fill it up insanely quickly if you're using the base model. So I think actually for the people that are using the base storage model and using external storage for bigger files, it's not going to make any difference at all because you're using external storage. If you are trying to do very small projects with 4K and 8K files, I don't think you're going to see that much of a performance here. I think they've actually made a really good decision here to keep the costs lower, because obviously the last thing we want is for the prices to go up, and everything's getting more expensive these days, let's be honest. So will it affect the M2 MacBook Air in the same way? Almost certainly yes, if you buy the base model, which is probably what I'll do, but I also don't think it's going to make that much difference because in general, I don't push it that hard in the first place. Maybe your mileage will vary, but I don't think mine will. Next up, Mark Graff asks, iCave answers, from the Max Tech review, it looks like in a lot of cases, the CPU speed increases on the M2 came from goosing voltage and clock speed rather than silicon improvements. Looks like the M2 MacBook Pro is a bit of a space heater. Doesn't bode well for M2 Pro and Max chips if Apple stays with 5nm. I agree, this is going to be a little bit warmer. We're only going up, though, remember, from 3.2 GHz to 3.49 GHz, so about 0.3 of a gigahertz. 300, is that 300 megahertz? That's what my original computer used to run on when I had, no, it wasn't. It was 33 megahertz. Yeah, it's not a huge difference. It does look like it's getting hotter. I think there is some improvement for Apple to do in terms of fan curves here, and I think that is something that they've probably kept it at the base initially to keep it quiet, but I think it probably needs to get a little bit more aggressive with the fans. I also think that, remember, the thermal design in the M2 Pro and Max with those bigger chassis, with the 14 and the 16-inch MacBook Pros, is going to be better, so I don't think it's going to be as much of an issue. I am slightly concerned for how it's going to run in the M2 MacBook Air, how quickly it's going to throttle. But again, you're not doing many sustained workflows in that. You're not going to be running this at full belt all the way through. The only times that it's going to be throttling is when you're running like Cinebench and stuff, which is not much of a real-world scenario for doing these things. If you are needing the sustained performance, we now know what M1 Pro, M1 Max are. We know what those devices are, and they're likely to come later this year, so it's probably better to hold off if that's what you need. If you are a normal human, though, that is doing some word processing and maybe editing the occasional video and doing a bit of Photoshop, stuff like that, it's not going to be a factor, I don't think. I don't think we're going to have, these feeling like space heaters. I think they are going to just, use the chips in a more reasonable way in most cases. Don't think it's going to be a massive issue, but if you are buying it for the massive performance increase that isn't really massive anyway, I don't think it's going to be a problem. And Evan Rogers asks, iCave answers, when do you think solid-state batteries will realistically appear in phones and other consumer electronics? 2030, 2040, or never? This is a really difficult one, because anything that is like looking at 5 to 10 years out, which is kind of what we're talking about here, we're talking about sort of 2030, 2040, basically means technology isn't ready, we don't know when it will be. And I think the more important thing at the moment is getting chips to be more efficient, so that the batteries that we already have are just more, they give you more bang for your buck. So we aren't going to be moving away from those batteries anytime in the foreseeable future, which is, I think, all you can say. If we're talking 2030, great. Are there applications, though, where a solid-state battery is more important than in a phone? Yes. I think if we can get more efficient batteries, we should probably be putting them into cars to encourage more people to move away from fossil fuels than worrying about whether your phone can last 3 days instead of 1. The chip, when the process fabs come down to 3nm from 5nm, that's going to make a far bigger difference in how long your battery lasts than whether you've got a solid-state one in your phone or not. Do we need phones to be any thinner? We've had the issues where we went to the thin end of the spectrum with the iPhone 6 and FlexGate or BendGate or whatever you want to call that one. So I don't think we want to make things much thinner. We just kind of lighter would be nice. But I think Apple's addressing that with material science, with going over to titanium frames in either the iPhone 14 or the 15. Probably the 15, let's be honest. They might as well change it when they change the design too. So I don't think that the battery is a huge weight factor in these devices. I think the frame, the glass, the steel is a lot more of that issue. And we already know that the iPhones made of aluminium are a lot lighter than the ones with stainless steel frames. Yeah, I guess kind of it'd be great when they come, but I'm not going to hold my breath. Don't forget, we are working now on Project 91, which is turning my Macintosh Classic 2 into an M1 powered beast. I think it'll be the first person that's done this. I don't think I've found anyone else that's done like a real classic Macintosh with M1, but if you have, let me know in the comments. I've seen a G5 that's running Apple Silicon. I don't think I've seen anyone do a G3 iMac or anything like that. G4 might have been done, but going back to the sort of early 90s, I don't think that's been done yet. So that's my next project. Thank you so much for watching. Thanks to all the Patreons, the beautiful people over here. Aren't they all attractive? Thanks so much for being here. See you in the next one. Want the latest Apple news, leaks and rumours? Subscribe and ring the bell.